After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked,
"Where is the one who has been born, King of the Jews?"
We saw his star when it arose,
and have come to worship him.
When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born.
"Oh, in Bethlehem, in Judea,"
they replied.
For this is what the prophet has said.
"But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler that will shepherd my people Israel."
Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said,
"Go, search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report back to me so that I too may go and worship him."
And after they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Good morning. This works better not during Christmas time. There's so much lights up here that you can see when it's not Ray walking up. The rest of the year when it's dark, there's less chance of people darting for the door as they see the silhouette. But we're talking about worship the King this morning. This morning, our teaching series is He is Worthy of Our Worship. So, if you have your notes, before we get started, here's what I want you to do. Take your bulletin that says He is Worthy of Our Worship, and I want you to put a question mark there. So the title is not He is Worthy of Our Worship, it is He is Worthy of Our Worship. Because that's not something that I can sit up here and tell you. That is something that you're going to have to answer for yourself. So, in that regards, I want to show you my backpack. This is my backpack. I spent too much on it. Fair to say, too much. I spent enough on this backpack that if your child were to come to you and say, "Mom and Dad, I want this backpack," your response would be something along the lines of, "You are out of your mind if you think I'm going to spend that much money on a backpack." My backpack. Now, I want to contrast that with Jace's backpack. Now, he actually recently upgraded. Prior to this year, he was using one of those JanSport backpacks. You know, the kind that you see like a high school student walking around in that they get on sale at Target, something like that. And that's because his mom gave it to him when he was in high school. And he was still using it close to 10 years later. He did upgrade this year to a $4 backpack that he found on Temu. So the question is, why was I willing to spend probably too much on a backpack, and Jace is rocking a 10-year-old bag that he probably got rid of because it finally had holes in it? Well, when I was in high school, in my economics class, we had a pawn shop owner come in. And he said something to me that has stuck with me all these years. He said, "Something is worth only what somebody is willing to pay for it." And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Because he will have people come in and they'll say, "Well, I paid, $200 for this." And he's like, "That's great, but somebody's only going to pay me $50. And so that's all it's worth to me. It is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it." So my question then is, why was I willing to pay so much for this backpack? Well, I also work as a software developer. And so this backpack, it has a nice side pocket for my laptop. Now, the side pocket, it sits up off the bottom of the bag so that when I set my backpack down, my laptop doesn't hit the ground. Now, because I work as a software developer and I do other work, I routinely carry around 2 laptops, an iPad. It also has a really nice, it unfolds all the way. So I can get to everything in my bag nice and easily. I have my smaller, overpriced bag inside my backpack to carry my tools around. I got my flashlight, and I got my Leatherman, and I got other stuff that I need. I have this pocket on the top, so I can easily access my pens and pencils. I got this other hidden pocket on the inside, so I can sort and organize everything. So what does this mean? It means that in my mind, this backpack is useful. This backpack provides utility, and because I viewed this backpack as being useful in having utility, I was willing to spend my money on it. Now, Jace is carrying around mostly gym clothes, and so a backpack is not worth much to him. It doesn't provide anything to him, so the value of that bag to him is very little. Now, this is important because we will worship what we see as having the most value. What we see as having the most worth in our life, that is what we will worship. And so I need to know what I find valuable. What do I see as worth something? And so you have 3 blanks at the top. You don't have to fill them in now, but if you want to take a second and think about here's how you identify what you find valuable. What makes you pull out your wallet and spend a little more on something that you wouldn't otherwise do? So if you were to think about that, what causes me to do that? For some people, it might be convenience. I'm very busy. I have to do a lot of stuff. And if I see that this thing saves me time, that is valuable to me. Or you might, here's the other thing about what we find valuable. As you process this, and here's the danger of what I'm telling you right now, somebody in here this morning is going to sit here for the next 30 minutes and think about what they find as valuable and not hear anything else that I say. And you know what? That's just a risk we got to take this morning because as you process through what you find valuable, another good question to ask yourself is, why is that valuable to me? Now, you might have some relatives that maybe went through the end of the Great Depression or maybe experienced parts of World War II. And that generation had a very distinctive impact that made on their life. When there was scarcity, when you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you didn't know if something was going to be available. And so if you might have some memories, Amanda's grandparents, they would have stuff like stocked under the bed, eight containers of toilet paper or various other supplies, because they went through a time of hardship that taught them that you never know when something else is going to be there. And so that impacted their life so much that they found value in the security of having this stuff there. For me, why do I find so much use of utility? I grew up in a family of 7, right? And unless your parents are a doctor and you have a family of 7, there's not a ton to go around. And so even into my younger adulthood, if something didn't provide value to me, if something wasn't useful to me, then I saw no value in it. I didn't hang paintings on the wall. I didn't hang art or anything that provided me no value. and I was concerned about making it through the day, and so that was useless to me. And so it's good to take a realistic evaluation of what we value, because we have to ask ourselves, are the things that I'm finding value in, are they leading me to God? Or are sometimes those values leading me away from God? We just did the first one. You want to put up the fill in the blanks? The first one was our history impacts what I value. And I'm just going to have them put all three fill in the blanks up there because we're not going to stop later on to fill them in. So we're just going to put all the fill in the blanks up there. And as we get through the teaching, you can just be like, oh, yeah, I remember that. That's probably where he meant for this to be filled in at. So we'll just do that all at once here. I had an experience when I was in high school that I feel like is not a typical thing you have happen. I was in church on a Saturday, not a Saturday night. I was in church on a Wednesday night. So it wasn't a normal Sunday service. It was a Wednesday service, and I went out. The bathrooms were out in the lobby, so I went out to use the bathroom, and I was probably like 14 maybe. And so there was a girl sitting out in the lobby, and she was probably like 22. And I knew her pretty well. And I started talking to her for a few minutes, and I was like, oh, what are you working on? She's like, well, I got this homework assignment. She was in college. She's like, I got this homework assignment due in a couple days, and I really have to read this and fill out this form. And she said something that kind of made me pause in the moment. She said, this thing I got to read, it's a lot more valuable than whatever's happening in there right now. And I was like, oh, okay. The quiet part out loud. You know, we don't always admit to something like that. And we're going to get back to the story, but it's easy to judge in that moment, like, wow, how could you say that? How could you say that whatever history book you're reading right now is more important than what's going on in church? And it was because, she just said it. In that moment, to her, this thing that she had to do was more important than what was happening in there. And that's how we live our life. So as we talk about what we value, as we talk about what's important to us, it's important to remember that we are not one-dimensional beings. I am not one who always values God and am therefore holy, or one who puts other things in front of God and am therefore should leave the church. It is every single day, every single moment that we are making value decisions about what gets my time and what gets my energy. So as we talk through this, the purpose is to say, as I walk through life and I go this way and that, what is holding my time and attention? So all that to say, that makes what happens in our text next all the more impressive, all the more amazing of what we see. So we're told that these magi came from the east, and they found Jesus. Now, Ray talked about this a couple weeks ago. These were prominent, most likely important people from wherever they came from. They made this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mile trek. It wasn't just a couple people. They probably had entourage with them. They probably had people to help them. It was a massive effort to get there and find Jesus. And so I really want to zero in on what the text says about what happens when they meet Jesus. So they come in, it says the star stopped over the house. They went into the house, they saw the child, and depending on your translation, it probably says they bowed down and they worshiped the king. They bowed down and they worshiped Jesus. So, being as Nathan and I just got through taking a semester of Greek at school, I was like, well, I got to look at the Greek, right? I can't let this can't let all this knowledge go to waste. Very little knowledge. But so this phrase, they bowed down and they worshiped. So it's two words here. The first word is, well, we're going to talk about the second word first. The word that's translated as to worship, it's proskuneo. Technically, that's the I worship version, but, conjugate it, it's a mess. But it's this proskuneo means, we translate it as I worship, but the actual literal translation is to lie prostrate, to bow down before somebody. And if this was a king or a ruler, it was done as a sign of respect to like a superior, and in the presence of divine beings, it was meant as a form of worship. And so the word right before that, which they translate as to bow down, is pipto. And that's also, so this word pipto, what it means is it means to fall down. So you'll see this a lot of times in the beginning of Matthew, especially where he uses two very similar words to emphasize what is happening here. These wise men, these magi came in, and it says literally they fell to the ground and they bowed down. What? This is what, as I thought about this, as I went through it in my mind, it kind of reminded me of like old pirate movies, right? They have this treasure map, and they're after this treasure. They're trying to find something of great value. Right now, it's not real. It's just this map that they have. And when they get there and they find the treasure, they like open it up, and there's gold coins, and they're like lifting it up and letting it fall through their fingers, and they're like tossing it up in the air. Or maybe you've seen a movie where somebody comes into a whole bunch of money, and so they're like throwing it up on the bed and swimming around. Like maybe if the laws of physics allowed, they would like Scrooge McDuck through the piles of gold. And it was just this like moment of rejoicing. And I think about these magi. They studied these texts. These texts that they probably read were hundreds of years old from the time that some no-name civilization was conquered by their land. They were in here for a time, and they probably studied multiple different lands' ancient texts. These were like, history geeks, or they were like the scientific community of this era. They studied the stars. And so maybe it originated with the text, maybe it originated with a star. They saw this, and they were like, what? This is not normal. What is happening here? And so maybe there's like a scramble through the text to find out, like, I read something about this here. What's this thing that's happening? And so they find this scroll that talks about something unbelievable, that talks about not just a God in heaven, but a God who is going to come down to earth to rescue his people. And this sparks something in them. They're like, could this be real? This is not just, in ancient times, especially, the view of the gods was more like God sits up in wherever he's at, and like if we get enough attention, if we jump up and down and yell loud enough, maybe he'll see us and help us out with something. You think about the time when Elijah went up against the prophets of Baal, and they had this big thing, and like the prophets of Baal were like whipping themselves and making themselves bleed. They thought, if I could just get God's attention, and we got to be careful. Like, are we thinking of God like that? Is God just sitting up on his throne, and if I can just get his attention, then he'll be like, oh, what's going on down there? Oh, you're having a little trouble? Pew, pew, pew. All right, now get on your way. Right? That's like the image of God that a lot of people have. It's like, oh, he's just up there. I'm doing my thing. And if I need help, and maybe if I've been good enough, what is it in movies that you always see? Well, God, I don't talk to you that much. But if you could really help me out right now, I could really use the help, right? And that's this image of God that a lot of people have. And this text was something different. This text was a text that didn't say, if you are good enough, then I'll watch out for you. This was a text that said, the God who sits in heaven was coming down to earth. And so they walk into this room and they see this child and they're like, it's real. It's real. And they fell down and they worshiped him. In all the stuff that they had studied, nothing ever said, God comes to you, God rescues you. Everything was like, you earn your way up. You do what you have to get to God. And this was a thing that said, no, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to rescue you. Now, here's what's so interesting about this word, to fall down. Because it has two meanings. And I believe that what he was doing here was using it for emphasis. And maybe he didn't imply this second meaning, but I find it interesting nonetheless. The second meaning that this word has is to fall away from a belief. And so it's used multiple times in the New Testament to describe people who fell away from their belief, who had something and they fell away from it. And I believe if you slot that definition into this moment, you don't lose anything there. Because what happened is these magi come into this room, and whatever beliefs they had held on to, whatever else they thought they knew, fell away in that moment as they saw God incarnate before them, God standing before them in the shape of this child. And that is why I love to come up here and lead worship, because worship is a moment where when we bring ourselves to God, when we connect with him in a time of worship, everything else falls away. Whatever problems I'm dealing with, whatever was yesterday, whatever's coming tomorrow, when I connect with God in a time of worship, that stuff doesn't matter anymore. And worship is not just sitting up here singing a song. You might be reading your Bible and you come across something and it just like hits you like a ton of bricks, and you have to stop in that moment, and you have this moment of worship with God as you just like waves of his love come over you, and you think, God, this is what you did for me. And that brings me back to that man who came into my classroom all those years ago, and he said, something is worth what somebody is willing to pay for it, right? Worship costs me something. If something doesn't cost me anything, it has no value, right? When Jesus talked about the widow who came and gave 2 pennies, and he talked about the rich man who came and gave in abundance, did that abundance cost him anything? No. He's got storehouses and storehouses. That was just the pittance to show everyone around him, look at what I do. And this widow, that cost her something. When we come and worship, at the very minimum, if I stand in here and sing, that costs me something, because in my mind, I know the people around me can hear me singing. And we had an associate pastor at my old church. He loved worship. He was usually one of the loudest people singing during worship, and he could not sing. He could not hold a tune. You know, he could stay on beat, but what he was singing, it wasn't what we were singing. And he did not care that the God that he worshiped was worth more than somebody else's opinion of his voice. Have you ever just laid down in prayer before God? Like that cost you something. To some, that might be like, well, that's my dignity. I'm going to lay on the ground. Yeah. if you ever get down on your knees before God and as you think about what he's done and it just drives you to the ground, to say, you are greater than I am. The cost to me is worth it. That's where these magi were when they came in and they saw this child. And as I read through the scriptures and I say, this is worth it. A couple of verses here that talk about in the New Testament. It says, Philippians 2:8, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Hebrews 12:2 says, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Both of these end on him going to the cross, and that can sometimes have less meaning to us. But the cross was the special execution that the Romans saved to show people we mean business. This was their worst that they had come up with. This was their way to say, I will do this to you if you do not listen to us. So when it says he went to the cross, that meant so much more to them. So let me read it this way from Isaiah 53:5. It says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was a chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. He was pierced and he was crushed. Why did God do it? Because we were worth so much to him. What was the price that he was willing to pay for us? That was the price that he was willing to pay, to shed his glory, to come down off of his throne. Who's choosing to go through life, right? It's hard. Life is hard sometimes. For some people, it's hard all the time. He's choosing to do this. He's got prime seats, right? He's in the box office. There's no reason but to save us. And it was worth the cost that he was willing to pay. He didn't do it to get us out of a jam and to send us on our way. 1 John 3:1 says, see what kind of love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God. And so we are. He paid the price so that we would be his sons and his daughters, and that we would never again be taken away from him. Right? How are we doing? Good? All right, because that was the easy part. That was the easy part. You see, this girl who told me that her homework was more important than what was happening in the service, she was not like the struggling Christian. She was not like the apostate. She was not the one that we're worried about what's going to happen to her. She sang or she played on the worship team. She had a genuine faith. She loved Jesus. I believe that. But in that moment, her homework in a couple days was the priority. And so there's probably somebody sitting in here right now. I'm sure none of you guys. Somebody else. Let's say somebody was watching online. Not you guys online, somebody else. Let's say somebody hears this at some point in some time, and I'm not referring to anybody specifically, but they're like, look, I'm in church, right? You got my tithe check, right? What do you want from me? And Nathan pointed this text out to me. Psalm 50, pretty interesting. Starting in verse 7. He says, listen, my people, and I will speak. I will testify against you, Israel. I am God, your God. I bring no charges against you concerning your sacrifices or concerning your burnt offerings, which are ever before me. I have no need of a bull from your stall or of goats from your pens, for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. So as he starts this off, I bring no charge against you concerning your sacrifices. They are ever before me. The people were doing what God told them to do. They were there. And, somebody might read this, and he says, I have no need of the bull from your stall or the goats from your pens. And you might be like, well, God, if you don't need this, I got a lot of stuff I could do with that bull if it's not important to you. If we take this and apply it to ourselves, if God has no need of me to be sitting here on a Sunday, and God has no need of my tithe check, there's other stuff I could do with that. There's a nice backpack I'm eyeing online that... So if you don't need it, God, what are we doing here? So let's keep reading. Verse 11, I know every bird in the mountains and the insects of the fields are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine and all that's in it. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Well, what does that mean? All right. So God, you don't need this. You're informing me multiple times here that you don't need it. So you're just like making demands of me, making sure that I'm going to do this? Is that what this is about? Let's read on. And he says, verse 14, sacrifice thank offerings to God, fulfill your vows to the Most High, and call on me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will honor me. All right, so you don't need my sacrifices. You don't need my tithe check. You don't need me here on Sunday, but you're still telling me to do it. Is this like busy work? Are you just trying to give me something to do until I'm coming to heaven? Is that what's happening here? I went through this like Bible college long time ago, and I asked the teacher this thing one time. I was like, hey, why do they do this? And he was like, well, I'll tell you what. I want you to write a one-page paper on what I want you to research it and write this paper. And I was like, okay. Next week I give him this paper. And I wait a day or so, and I'm like, well, what'd you think? He goes, oh, I didn't read it. What am I doing here if you're not going to, is that what's going on here with God? Okay, you don't need my money, you don't need my time, but I still got to do this. Why? Why, God? What am I doing? I got other stuff I could be doing with my time. Here's what I believe, and I'm going to read this scripture after this. Well, let me say it this way. I was walking the dogs yesterday, and there's a dry creek bed that I take them to walk them. And in this creek bed are these kind of big, they're more like big hills. We call them mountains, but they're like big hills. And so sometimes I take the dogs up to the top of this hill, and it's kind of like a stretch of them. So it goes along. It's like, just like any big hill in Phoenix. There's a lot of rocks, there's a lot of brush, there's some trees. And this is just out in, there's nothing here. It's just the dry creek is for the rain runoff. So it's not a hiking area. There's no trails. It's just people come out and walk here because we don't have water in Phoenix. So, I take the dogs out there. I walk them. I get up to the top of this hill. And the first time I get up here, you go up to the peak, and then it goes down a little bit. And I know on the far side, there's a road that I can walk down if I can get to the far side. And I get up there and I realize I can't see anything. There's not a path for me to follow. I actually know how to get to this road that I need to get to. And I'm like, well, I mean, I guess I'll just walk. And what happens is I look up, and in the distance, I see a street light sticking up. And it looks like it's just coming up from the mountain. But that's because this road comes up to the mountain, and that's the road I need to get to. And I think there's a street light. I bet that street light is on the road. And if I just follow and go to that street light, I will get off of this mountain that I'm on. And so it reminded me again as I walked towards it, because yesterday, as I'm walking towards it, I think I know where the street light is. So I'm just walking, and I'm looking down because it's brush and rocks, and I don't want to fall and break my ankle or something. And I look up, and I'm like, where's the street light? And I look over, and I'm like, how did I get, okay, let's reorient myself and start walking towards the street light again. I'm going to go out of order here a little bit. I want to read this to you. This is what, well, I'm not going to read that yet. I'm going to give you my take, and as we read through this, I want to give you a scripture to back up my take, and the scripture is padded throughout. So let me just give you my take, and we'll keep going. So the Sunday mornings, the tithe, right? When God gave them the festivals, when God gave them the sacrifices, what did He give them for? So that they would not forget what He did for them. Right? When we come to church on Sunday, when we give our tithe check on the Sunday, it's so that I remember what He did for me. So the point of us coming here is not just so that we give God our little tributes and then He's happy and then I move on with our life. It's so that as we're walking down this no path terrain and I'm trying to find my way through life, I look to this lamppost in the distance and I know that that's where I need to go. This is my North Star. This is my guiding point. And as I go throughout the week, I find myself going off course and I come back to church and I remember, okay, no, this is where I need to be. This is my guiding post, and I can keep moving. And if I find myself wandering this way and I see the lights over there, well, I can adjust my course and I go back, right? When we gather, it's a time for us to reorient ourselves because come Monday morning, it gets harder. Maybe as soon as you leave the church, it gets harder. Maybe as soon as you pick up your kids from the nursery, it gets harder. And we have to reorient ourselves constantly. Okay, so let me read what David says in Psalm 51. This was written just after all the stuff with Bathsheba happened, and Psalm 51, verses 1 through 15, are this long stretch of repentance that he does, of just professing his repentance. And he ends it with this in verse 16. He says, "For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." Now verse 19. "Then you will delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings, in whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar." What David realized is that I could sacrifice 1,000 cows to God, it won't matter. Because what David said is, he said, a broken and contrite heart. And so what is the opposite of that for David? It's what just happened. It's a proud heart that stood on top of his castle, that looked out in the distance and saw this married woman and said, I want that and I'm going to have it. That's what he realized he had become. And he realized, I could give you 1,000 bulls and it won't matter if my heart isn't right. And so he says, so I come to you humbly with a broken spirit that says, this is where it says, you and you alone have I sinned against. Then our sacrifices to God are pleasing. Then they are acceptable. If I come in with a proud heart and say, here's my check, I'm here, and now I'm out of here, that doesn't mean anything to God. If I haven't come to offer him something. And this is echoed by the prophets throughout. And I want to read one here, Jeremiah 7:22. It says, "For in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this command I gave them, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. And walk in all the ways that I commanded you, that it may be well with you." When he brought them out of the land of Egypt, he didn't say, I brought you out, you better bring me a cow every single Sunday or I'm coming for you, right? That's not what he said. He said, I am your God, you are my people. And all the stuff that was instituted after that was to remind us so that we would never forget who God was to us, the price that he paid for us. He is after our true worship. And so that's what I want to talk about now. What is our true worship? And so I want to look at Romans 12:1. This is the ESV translation. It says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." Do you ever come across a verse and you read it and you're like, I don't know what that means. What is my spiritual worship? Does that mean what I think about? Or what is this verse implying that is my spiritual worship? And so I want to give you a little trick that I learned about looking at verses like this. So I want to talk about just this last little bit, our spiritual worship. And if you've ever studied a second language, or anybody in here that speaks two languages, you know that there's not a one-to-one between languages, right? If I were to describe something, if I said an old abandoned building, that would conjure up probably a certain image in your mind. Now, what if I said an old decrepit building? It kind of changes the view of how you picture that building in your mind. Now, let's say somebody else is trying to describe to somebody what I am trying to say. Now, maybe they don't have a word that encapsulates this idea of decrepit. It has a very specific connotation. You can use other words, and maybe you're trying to relay this to somebody and you want to just get this idea across. You might just say, well, it's an old building, it's run down. That mostly gets it, right? And so when you have passages like this where you see a variety of things, it is them trying to wrestle with, how do I convey what the Scripture is talking about here? So the ESV, our spiritual worship. Okay, I'm not completely understanding that. The NASB, our spiritual service of worship. Okay, that adds a little twist on it. So maybe I'm supposed to be doing something here. The CSB, our true worship. Okay, so our spiritual worship, this is our true worship, implying something else is not quite what it is. And then the NASB, our true and proper worship. So we kind of get a better idea maybe of what's happening here. So again, gotta use this stuff that I just spent 3 months learning. So we're going to look at the two Greek words that make up this phrase here. The first one that they render as spiritual or true and proper, it can be translated as spiritual. The word is logikos. But what this means is it's the true nature of something. What's the pure and real thing of something. So if I meet somebody, when I initially meet somebody, I meet the person who they want me to see, right? But as I get to know somebody, as I spend time with them, I really learn who they are. I find out who their true self is. So this word that they translate as spiritual, and they translate it as spiritual because it's my innermost being. It's who I really am. Okay? So the pure innermost thing. Okay, the second word, which they translate as worship, not the same word that we translated as worship in the passage in Matthew. This word is latreia. Now, this word latreia can be translated as worship, but it was also what they used to describe the duties that the Levites had in the temple. So this acting out their duties in the temple, this was their worship to God, or at least a part of their worship. So what this is saying, my true worship, my true walking out, my true duty to God. Okay, but what? Okay, I got that. What is my true duty to God? Okay, we'll go back and read it. He starts with therefore. Now, you've probably heard Mark say this. Therefore, we have to know what the therefore is there for. That was a lot better. Last night I forgot it, and I was just like, I can't remember this really fancy saying, but here we are. I remembered it today, but now I've admitted that I forgot, so I've lost that credibility. So 9 through 11 in Romans, he's talking about the sacrifice that God made for us, how he brought us into his family, how we were grafted on to the vine of God. We were the wild shoots, and we were grafted in. God called us his sons and daughters. We were brought into his family. Therefore, everything that God has done for you, therefore, brothers and sisters, the ESV says, by the mercies of God. Another translation says, in the light of God's mercies, in the view of God's mercies. Based off of everything that he has done for you, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. This is holy and acceptable to God. My life given to God as a holy sacrifice. This is what is true and acceptable. This is my true, my proper, the greatest purity that I have. This is my worship and service to God, is to give my life to him every single day. God doesn't just want your Sunday morning. He doesn't just want the 10th of your paycheck that you put in the tithe box. He wants us to be his sons and daughters. If you have kids and they're adults, I have that, but they still live with me, so I can only partially register with this. But if they're out there doing their thing and they never call you and it's months and months and you think, I birthed you. I mean, probably only the ladies think that. But you're like, what am I getting back from this? God doesn't want us just to be children who go off and do our thing and never speak to him again. He wants us to be family. He wants us to know him. He wants us to walk with him every single day of our life. And so I want to read this to you real quick. We're ending here. The book of Haggai, very short, 2 chapters, written not long after the people have come back from exile. All right, so set the scene. They've been in Babylon for 70 years. They're crying out to God to save them. God comes in. He brings them back to the land of Israel. They start to rebuild. Starting at Haggai 1, verse 2. These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord. Then the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and you have harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but never have your full. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages does so to put them in a bag with holes. Does that feel like life? You're earning your wages and you just put them in bags of holes that flow out. No matter how much I earn, I still don't have enough. No matter how much I eat, I'm not satisfied. No matter, that might be my 6th bag, but I'm not satisfied. Surely there's a better bag out there that I could have. But have I neglected God's temple? Now, I'm not talking about this here. I'm not talking about this. 2 Corinthians 6:16 says, we are the temple of God. So, a lot of people view that as, yes, our physical bodies are a temple, but I want you to imagine in your life, in your spiritual, true self, that there is a temple where God dwells. Have we neglected that temple? Am I chasing every single thing under the sun? Am I trying to earn enough? Am I trying to achieve enough? Am I trying to find satisfaction? And the temple of God where the Spirit dwells in my life is in ruins. We can't just love God. I got to be desperate for God. The more time I spend with God, the more my spiritual temple grows, the more I feel God with me, the more I'm able to walk through this life. Think about this. I read, the next day it's a little easier. I read, the next day it's a little easier. Now consider this. I wake up, there's 10 things on fire. I got 20 emails from work. Everybody needs something right now. And you blink and it's 10 o'clock. Where did my day go? Not hardly once did I stop and think. Maybe my thought went to, I probably ought to stop and read at some point. And then the next day, it becomes a little easier to not read. And then the next day, it becomes a little easier to not pray. And then the next day, and pretty soon my routine becomes, I'm here on Sunday, God. I'm putting in my tithe check. What more do you want from me? Do you see everything that I'm dealing with? And I am not trying to beat you up by this because I face this every single day. I get up, I got emails from work, I got all this stuff pressing against me, and when I don't make time for God, pretty soon I find myself in a routine, frustrated and upset, not happy with I'm working all this stuff, and none of it makes me happy because I've neglected the temple. I've neglected God, and the temple lies in ruins. And until I go back to God, I don't make it there. I have three. Well, let me ask you this. I valued that. I put my time and my effort and my money into getting that. We are coming up on the end of a new year. Well, we're coming up on a new year. We're coming up on the end of a year. You know what I meant. Coming up on this, right? If you look back at the last week, if you look back at the last month, if you look back at the last year, these are what your next 3 fill in the blanks are for, and you don't have to fill them out today, but I hope if you don't fill them out, you at least think about it this week. What did I value? What did I value in the last week? What did I value in the last month? What did I value in the last year? Did I value God this past year? And what did I reap from that? Am I chasing everything, not happy, not satisfied? God's mercies are new every morning. Tomorrow is a new day. Yesterday does not define what your future is. Every single moment of every single day, I have a choice to make. It doesn't mean I can't listen to any music that's not Christian. It doesn't mean I can't watch any movie that's not Christian. It doesn't mean that I can't do anything that doesn't involve me doing something for the church or specifically before God. It means that as I walk through my life, I shine like Jesus did in there. It means that He is my priority. So when I make a decision based off of what God would have me do in that situation. It means that as I go to my job, I present myself in the light that God would have me do, regardless of what happens to me, regardless of a manager that I dislike, regardless of an employee that I hate, regardless of customers that I'm tired of talking to, regardless of what I face. It means every single day I give my life to God over and over and over again. And every day I have a choice to say, I failed there, but I won't fail here. I messed up there, but God's mercies are new every morning. And now I will walk with God. So we're going to end as we have throughout this teaching series with a song. And look at this, I just got my guitar up here. So we're going to stand up and we're going to sing a song together.